I personally think fear is the biggest issue. People will often be worried about saying the wrong thing because they don't want to offend people. Well, actually, if the motivation is genuine and people want to have the conversation, you might not get it right and mistakes happen. There's an opportunity to develop and learn things.
Welcome, everyone. We have a new guest today, Dr. Chris Whitaker. He's a coach, disability and inclusion specialist, and one of the founders of Purple Advantage. Welcome to our studio, Chris.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, Chris. Is there anything people that are listening should know about you or you would like for them to know about you?
It's a good question. I've worked in various disability roles for about 15 years now. Co-founded Purple Advantage about 18 months ago with my wife, Fran, who used to be a Paralympic swimmer. So she's the really, really interesting one who probably is much more interesting than I am. I'm just the business geek, really. Between us, we make a really good double act, husband and wife, as well as business partners. So there's a lot of unspoken understanding there in our partnership, which is really great. And yeah, we do lots of different things. I'm really, really passionate about disability inclusion, the power of being inclusive and the difference and impact that can make. So hopefully we'll cover that ground today in more detail. And yeah, thanks again for having me.
We're very curious to find out more about Purple Advantage and what do you guys do? What was the purpose behind creating such a venture and what are your long-term goals?
Yeah. So yeah, in terms of Purple Advantage, it was born really as a combination of a couple of things, but really crystallized while I was at business school. So I'm a perpetual student. So started in law many, many years ago, and then went to do a master's and a PhD, and avoided the real world for as long as possible in the process. And then decided I wanted to do something completely different. And at the time, Fran was preparing to compete at London 2012. So she had a really successful international Paralympic swimming career. So she's a 5-time world champion, a 6-time Paralympic medalist, and swam with Great Britain for 10 years. And she said, well, I've not got an agent. And I was like, London 2012 is going to be massive in terms of the Paralympics. You need an agent. And nobody would do it. So I was like, well, I want to do something completely different. I'll have a go. And it kind of snowballed from there. And from there, I proceeded to work in different roles in sport. But I'm always seeking to innovate and to self-improve as a lot of good coaches would. You know, it's a continuous process of development and seeking to be the best version of myself that I can. So an opportunity came up to go to business school. So I happened to be at Cambridge, near where I live. And while I was at business school, it was very much a collision of different worlds because I've worked in disability for a long time, but then started to think about the world of business and how that engaged, and learned more about something called the Purple Pound, which is the spending power of disabled people. And just in the UK, it's worth about £270 billion a year. So just in the UK, I'm like, this is a huge market. But then around disability, I know that there's a lot of fear around it and a reluctance sometimes to not want to say the wrong thing. And there's lots of information out there that is basically an undertapped market. So from a business perspective, it's like, well, this is fantastic because you can make a real difference, because we know that disabled people, for example, are underrepresented in employment, and there's a big disability employment gap in the UK and across the world, and particularly in leadership roles, disability and disabled people tends to be underrepresented, unfortunately. But also commercially, it makes sense. So it ticks a lot of boxes as well as being something I'm deeply passionate about. So Purple Advantage was born then, and since then we have started to work with some major clients. So we've literally had a kick-off meeting with a client today that they're so new that I can't even say the name of the client, but looking forward to sharing more about that in due course. And we work with a really big shopping centre, so that shopping centre provides, there's 2,000 staff and over 140 shops. So we provide all the disability training and support for them to help the staff there provide a really great customer service experience there. And being the perpetual student I am, the first thing I did after I'd finished my exec MBA at Cambridge was say, well, what do I do next? And coaching seemed the really obvious thing. And we're lucky to hear from Gary Kotos, who has another equally good podcast called The Unlock Moment. And sorry if that's not the done thing to put somebody else's podcast on yours, but then got talking to him about the power of coaching, the difference that can make. And I said, well, look, if I want to do this coaching things, because I've worked with a lot of senior leaders in my career and kind of use coaching skills and counseling skills as well. And I said, well, if I wanted to get serious about that, like, where do I go? I want to do it properly because it sounds like a really big and important role and a big important responsibility. And he said, well, if you want to do it in the UK, like, Henley is the go-to place. So me being me, I rang up Henley and spoke to people and got on the course, and they've just completed that now and have done just about 50 hours worth of work, mainly specialising with other disabled people. And what I'm finding is that there's a real lack of knowledge and understanding where disability is concerned in the general sense. That there's quite a bit of interest around neurodiversity specifically, which is really good. But in terms of a broader pan-disability approach, I was raising issues with my poor tutors who were alongside me on the course at Henley, and they were saying things like, well, nobody's ever asked that. So, for example, on one of the ICF criteria, one of them was like, you're able to kind of see a physical manifestation of somebody's change and the realization that can make. And my question, well, what if that person is deaf and or doesn't react in that way? And they're like, good question. Nobody has ever asked us. So, there's clearly good work to continue to be done in order to make sure that coaching is, there's space for everybody that wants to embrace coaching and realize the transformative difference that coaching can make. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the crowd on that one. And so through Purple Vantage, we have a program called Coaching with a Cause, whereby for every piece of work that we do that's full price, we allocate a number of hours where disabled people can have coaching for £1. So for every full price coaching hour that I do, a disabled person can have coaching for £1. For every membership package that we sell, a certain number of hours that disabled people can access for £1. To really try and make sure that the barriers to entry in terms of inclusion and the financial barriers that disabled people can sometimes experience are hopefully mitigated by that approach.
Fascinating. It has been a journey, evolving one from another into another. There's lots of passion, there's lots of plans that haven't been realized yet. And it's great to have your other half on board as well. Being in that team spirit, growing something together, that must be quite exhilarating.
Yeah, it is. And Fanny's great. So we both coincidentally, without wishing to digress too much, so we met. So while I was procrastinating, trying to finish my PhD or avoid doing that, we met online in about 2010 on a online dating website, and it just so happened by complete coincidence that we both had the same disability, cerebral palsy, that affects our mobility, but has slightly different effects for the both of us. And it was really, I'd not had a relationship with a disabled person before. And so for me, I've been disabled since birth because cerebral palsy generally occurs through oxygen starvation prior to birth happening. And it was only really through talking with Fran that she really opened my eyes to what this world of disability was like and helped me to be more comfortable in my own skin. Because certainly growing up, I didn't want to have anything to do with that world. I wanted to kind of get on, and it's always been part of who I am as opposed to the sum total of who I am. But it was through those conversations and through getting to know each other, Fran basically taught me everything I know in terms of disability and the social model and those sort of really foundational cornerstone of things, and brings very much her own perspective in terms of high performance and that mentality of swimming is a really brutal sport that seconds can make a difference. So she's relentless in the pursuit of what she wants to pursue, and we're both very competitive in different ways. Yeah, it's a strong and special relationship that I'm looking to have with her and to explore what this journey can do really, and it's great to share with each other. The only things are sometimes we have to say, right, we're just going to be finding Chris now. We're not going to talk business. We're not going to, I've got a little notebook here, like full of ideas and things that I just have to write down and then put to one side to be able to switch off. Because sometimes it's harder to switch off and takes more discipline to do so than actually to continue to do the work, which is never quite done, as I'm sure you both can relate to.
Absolutely. I can relate to both sides. I can relate with working with your other half, and I can relate with we grew business together with my husband as well, back in the day. And I know how it is when, especially when you have passion and you're inspired by your work, you can do and talk about this 24/7. But I think healthy boundaries
Yeah.
definitely required for that. So you're great for noticing this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
And listening to your story, it seems to me that fate brought you together. And the good thing is you have common interest, obviously. And so it's not just about you and Fran, about your family, but what both of you are doing is doing something bigger than you as a unit, right? And you're trying to change the world. You're starting from UK, and I'm pretty sure soon you will have very global outreach. Our podcast is for leaders, for executives, for managers, and this is a good platform to convey certain messages. If you could say a couple of words to leaders who are in power to change something in their organization and start with something small, what would that be?
I'd say two things if I can be slightly greedy. Listen and listen really well, but also have a look at who's not in the room. So sometimes I'm the only person with a visible disability in the room and will notice things. And sometimes I'm invited specifically for that reason. One of the things I often say is that lots of talent arises through diversity, and there are lots of talented disabled people out there, and through working with disability and becoming more inclusive in what we do and how we do it, that doesn't just benefit disabled people, but that benefits everybody. And what the evidence shows us that from a business perspective, the strongest teams are diverse ones that can look at issues in a very holistic perspective and bring solutions. And it's a bit of a cliche, but disabled people tend to be great problem solvers because we have to be. We have to navigate life in different ways. And I think businesses tend to miss out on opportunities because there's not always, through lack of employment of disabled people, as a specific example, people are missing out on talent and are missing out on opportunities to improve what they do and how they do it. So that is something that would always encourage people to embrace talent and the many forms that it can take.
And I really like your message, Chris, because it's not just about let's include people with disability, let's be more inclusive, let's help them, but it's bigger than that, right? It's alternative costs of not working with people with disability and foregone profits, many other benefits that businesses and ventures are not able to get just by being traditional and just by kind of going the easy way. And I really like your approach because this is actually win-win for everyone.
Yeah, let's help each other.
Businesses are inclusive.
Yeah.
Let's lift everyone up. Let's make sure that everybody has an equal opportunity to participate in society and live the best life that they can. And let's try along the way and be emotionally intelligent human beings and listen well and learn from each other.
Yeah, that's a great message, Chris. From the different perspective, without sounding too blunt, I'm sure you see a lot of different examples, but where do you see leaders mostly get disability inclusion completely wrong? So, where there's complete blind spots, so to speak.
I personally think fear is the biggest issue. So I was working on something with Fran today, and we were saying that the worst thing that people can say is nothing at all, because then the conversation doesn't happen. There's no development there because literally nothing is happening. So, for example, people will often be worried about saying the wrong thing because they don't want to offend people. Well, actually, if the motivation is genuine and people want to have the conversation, you might not get it right and mistakes happen. We all make mistakes every day. I've been working on this for a long, long time, and I'm still learning and developing, and we'll make mistakes and learn things. Have the conversation that through that communication, there is an opportunity to to develop and learn things. And it might feel a bit uncomfortable to do so at first, but actually it gets easier with time and practice. And at the heart of what we do is the creation of a lot of psychological safety for non-disabled people to make sure that any question it genuinely asked is a good one, and there the space when it happens. I'd say that's the biggest mistake. The second thing that I've observed is the lack of diversity in teams, both in terms of technical experience and the composition of teams. So quite often you look around cores and you kind of can see the halo effect in operation, because you're like, wow, there's, you might have concentration of experience or demographic or composition, but actually there are really big gaps here because of what's going on. As a result, perspectives are being missed and diversity of thought is being missed, and the best cohorts, the best teams, the best groups that I've been part of have been the ones that where there was diversity of thought. So in my exec MBA cohort, for example, there were over 40 different nationalities from right across the world. The fusion and the ability to learn and listen to all those different perspectives and be challenged by those led to a much stronger standard and a much more meaningful experience that improved everything we did and how we did it. And I think if we can apply those mindsets to what we do in work and in the world more generally, then as a rule we'll be better off.
Actually, it resonates with me because sometimes I catch myself, I don't want to sound ignorant, or I don't want to sound politically incorrect or appear patronizing. And that sometimes stops me personally from doing or saying things. And what you're saying is we kind of have to slightly be comfortable with some sense of unease, right? Because it might prevent, obviously not abuse it, but it might prevent from doing something differently, from welcoming some uncomfortable truth maybe, or from welcoming sometimes sensitive communication, some sensitive conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly from a coaching perspective, I'm always very client-led and person-centered, as you would expect me to be as a good coach. But as a rule in life and in coaching specifically, I wouldn't ask somebody to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. So sometimes we all have to be a little bit uncomfortable and open to new ideas and constructive challenge and different perspectives. And if we are, the risk-reward ratio, that it always pays off. The equation, as a general rule, if we average that out over time, there's always more value to be gained than by not developing or not going there, particularly when in the case of disabled people as a specific demographic, appreciating the intersections, for example, between disability and gender and disability and cultural diversity as well. But, there's over 1 billion disabled people in the world. There's 9 million disabled people in England, for example. So as a rule, between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 people that you will meet will have a disability of some description. So that's huge. And through being curious about that and having that growth mindset and embodying that growth mindset in what we do and how we do it, I think there's an opportunity there to be, and I'm sounding really preachy today, and I don't mean to, but I think there's an opportunity there to be better humans in the process.
Yeah, because it translates across the board. Because when you're talking about diversity, you're just talking about humanity. You're talking about being human to each other and having these conversations, sometimes uncomfortable or not. And that opens up the doors, whether we're talking about disability, inclusion, or we're talking about an issue at work about something. So if we get into practicing of embracing that, I think across the board, we all can benefit. Chris, with Purple Advantage, you talk to big companies, you talk to organizations that have multi-layered composition of organization. Have you noticed any resistance sometimes to accepting the training, accepting the message you're trying to convey?
There might be some of that. And I always half seriously joke that it's never really the people that I see in these things that I worry about. It's the people that I don't see that I'm like, come along the journey. And So that there might be, but I tend to find that once organized, particularly the ground up, but ideally you get a kind of ground up and top down buy-in, so you kind of get it all converges and comes together nicely. But yeah, absolutely. You know, there is a bit of resistance if we look around the world at the moment. There are challenges to that, and that happens for a variety of reasons, and that's really sad, because what that is effectively is a missed opportunity. And particularly from a business perspective, it's been really interesting to look at how businesses have responded to the current landscape. Some people have doubled down, some people have decided not for us. Some people, you do a lot of DEI work by stealth at the moment because the objectives remain the same, but actually you have to frame your narratives. So if we're talking about the bottom line, well, let's talk about the bottom line then. The purpose and the objective is still the same in terms of trying to make an organization more inclusive. And the good news about doing that is it ticks all those boxes. It does make a difference to the bottom line. It does create a more inclusive environment for everybody. And it also makes it hopefully a better place to be as well. And there are really serious business implications for that in terms of reduction of turnover, making sure that people feel valued, making sure that people do feel psychologically
Yeah.
safe so they can contribute their best selves at work. And if we think about it in those terms, I don't know many people who wouldn't want to be in places and spaces like that. And there does come a point of where I kind of say, well, if I can tell you that it will make you a profit and it will make it more inclusive for everybody and it will reduce turnover and there'll be good compliance reasons. If all of that doesn't get you, I kind of don't know what else to say. Maybe it's not for you at the moment, or maybe it's not the right time where you're at, and we'll come back and revisit it perhaps. But it isn't going to be for everybody all of the time, and there'll always be resistance. The interesting thing is to try and explore where that resistance comes from, and how to have a dialogue to be able to change that and challenge that. So whether that be from lack of experience or different cultures or fear or whatever that is. And this is why I always think about listening as being really important. Ironically, for somebody who's talking a lot on a podcast today, I have to sort of lead with that to be able to understand where people are at and be able to engage on a really quite foundational and fundamental human level, and just to be able to relate to somebody, if that makes sense.
I'm glad you talked about resistance, because even through our shared love for coaching, we know that this is a human trait. This is just something, any change comes in, whether that's your training and your products or something else, there's always at some level you encounter that. You encounter some sort of resistance, and it's just how you deal with it in the moment and how you see it that makes a difference. Approaching it from the place of what could make you more comfortable with accepting it. I think that's sort of like a great approach.
The resistance might be linked to certain limiting beliefs. What you described is obviously there are benefits of making companies more inclusive. And, yes, you can raise awareness about that. Yes, we all hear about that. Maybe not enough. Maybe certain companies, they need hard numbers, right? And they have competing priorities. Yet, from our experience, we've done training on neurodiversity in coaching. And from our experience of working with companies, with Anastasia, we see that, especially with neurodivergent clients, it's not just about benefit, but it's about the cost as well. The actual cost of implementing inclusive environment, they're not that high. Sometimes it takes very small steps to make big difference. Would you agree with that statement that maybe companies, they don't have necessarily good understanding of what the costs are of making the environment more inclusive, more welcoming?
Yeah, I'd certainly agree that I talk about quick wins all the time, and certainly so if you use the example of reasonable adjustments or accommodations in the workplace, the majority of those are really simple, and there was research from the Business Disability Forum in the UK that demonstrated the cost of most reasonable adjustments are less than £100. I think the typical price was something like £80. So what's that? It's like an hour of someone's time, a few hours of somebody's time, and that reasonable adjustment will literally pay for itself. And
Yeah,
there
I
was a
mean,
really interesting.
some offices spend more on coffee as an incentive to the colleagues, so it's definitely valid.
Yeah, yeah,
Chris, do you mind sharing maybe success stories? Because we're talking about problems, but
Yes.
surely, especially in the UK, there are companies that doing this and approaching this correctly. So what are they doing right, and what is the success story to inspire maybe other companies?
yeah. I think there are lots of good companies out there that are doing this particularly well. It generally starts from um a willingness to admit that there is value to be gained from improvement. And that value can take many forms. Maybe people have their own lived experience or experience where disability has impacted on people's lives, for example, and they want to do better, but don't quite know how, but want to make a start. So they come to us and let's have a conversation. Sometimes it is about a kind of cliche light bulb moment. You speak about it, and it's like, well, how, yeah, okay, there's a big issue there. I was talking to somebody the other week, and we're having a conversation, and I said, well, actually, in terms of the conversation was about education, and I said, well, actually, in terms of if you look at it from a broader perspective around investment, the education of younger disabled people is particularly important because they're the next generation of the workforce. So actually there's your investment case, if you like, if you want to put it in those terms. And people need investment to be able to succeed. And if people don't get that investment, then they're not going to be able to do as well because they won't have the opportunities that are there. The best organizations that I work with and see are the ones that are curious, have the confidence to go there, to be able to open themselves up to those more challenging conversations, or those ones that we want to do something, but we don't know where to start. So that's where the quick wins kick in, and you just like, well, actually, yeah, let's demystify some of these things. Let's break it down and solve the problem and make it a little bit easier. A really good example would be and I've not even shared this idea with the client yet, so they'll listen to this and go, "Oh, that's a good idea." But where somebody's coming into a building and they want to have a conversation um, around something related to a disability, they ask for anaesthesia. So then, for example, that somebody wants to have a private, discreet conversation about their needs because they've asked for anaesthesia, and that then provides them with the means to have a conversation that might be sensitive to them. That means that they can have a much more inclusive experience. Now, that doesn't cost anything at all. But the simple act to be able to make somebody more welcome in an environment by giving them the opportunity to communicate what their needs are, that could be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. The communication and the variety of it, and the way we all different, whether we are neurodiverse or neurotypical, or we have a disability or we don't, of any kind. Having options in the workplace where you can express yourself comfortably, or anywhere any sort of place you enter, is a massive advantage. Now you had success stories, and you've been expanding Purple Advantage. The managers are listening now, and they're like, "Oh, that sounds great, but when will I see the returns of any kind? Wherever the returns may look like for them. How soon do people see or feel the difference and the results of you entering the organization? Is it once you leave and then you see solid results, or is it in the process they already see change straight away?"
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think there are, if we break it down into three different types, so I think there are kind of the quick wins that we can do. So we can put a handrail somewhere and everyone will use it. We can do some training and do the training workshop, and people have and hopefully an infusion of knowledge and an uptick in the knowledge that comes from that. That's great. There are medium term things that where um, people have got used to things and we've done interventions and they had that foundation knowledge, and then the opportunity to apply it, say, for example, over a period of 12 months or so, and then we'll go back and we'll see that other things, that's been the catalyst, other things that have happened as a result of that, that things have sprouted off and that people have been curious and developed things in other ways. And some things will be really long term. So sometimes I'll hear from people years later that they'll have had a light bulb moment in other work that I've done because they'd not even thought about it. And hopefully, in the end, these things work themselves into the cultural fabric and the DNA of organizations so that it becomes part of their modus operandi, part of what they do. It just happens because everybody has a space and is welcomed in, and then you see it weaves into culture and just part of what the organization does, to operate successfully. So I think the short answer is it depends, but it's possible to break down, and people will naturally want to see impact. So with training, for example, we always do pre and post measures to be able, okay, well, we started here and now after 2 hours we're here. And then how do we build on that for that next step? So, saying I was never satisfied before and I'll always want more. Well, I will always want more because how can we, great, you've developed, but how can we take it to the next level so that the benefits can continue to happen?
And it paints a great picture. You described yourself as the person that continuously likes to evolve and better himself. And I'm sure the same applies for Purple Advantage and everything that you do. I'm sure you have a little bit utopian picture of perfect workplace. Of what would that look like? So if you were to imagine this, how far away do you think we are right now? It's a difference in regions, and people will be listening from different places, but we'll specifically apply that to UK market. How far away do you think we are from that place that you would see acceptable and ticking all the boxes that are required for inclusive workplace?
It's a really good question. I think there are improvements in some ways, and I think the awareness is better than it has been, and the level of knowledge that people have is better than it has been historically. It's not always my first resort, but if we look at in the UK, there's a much stronger set of legal provisions that have been there than historically have been the case, which are helpful hooks, levers, and drivers all at the same time. For some people. That being said, one of the things I did when I was studying is I did my dissertation focused specifically on disability employment, and I did a survey of disabled people whose voices are often missing from research. So a lot of the research tends to be done for understandable reasons with organisations and business listed or other organisations, so it gets done uh, in that way, which is I can completely understand. I specifically wanted to focus on the voices of disabled people and what their experiences were. And the results of that survey were then a survey of 120 people, so not the biggest sample and with very clear methodological limitations on that, but a reasonable sample nonetheless for a single researcher doing research over a number a few weeks. And 71% of people who completed that survey said that they'd been discriminated against either in the workplace or when looking for work. And that
Mhm.
was in 2024. So, and that result really shocked me. And I was also shocked because I'd said that kind of headline result to other people, and they said, "Oh, yeah, I'm not surprised. We've got such a long way to go." So I think that whilst there has been improvement, there is still a long way to go, and results like that indicate to me that there is still a long way to go, and there's still a huge gap, and a really really stubborn gap actually in the UK, in terms of the gap in disability employment. That's the gap between the rate of uh, disabled people being employed and non-disabled people being employed. It's around about 30%, and it's tended to vary between kind of 25 and 30% historically over a number of years. So it's a really um, entrenched problem to address. I think there's indications of change and improvement, but there's also indications that there's still quite a long way to go and a lot of work to be done.
Oh, Chris, you mentioned 71%, and that's a shocking number. of experiencing discrimination, straight away I had a thought, because we all have a little limitations, little blind spots. Is there something that maybe HR specialists or managers that are hiring right now, they might be overlooking, that may come across as discrimination to a person with disability? Maybe there's something that they're not aware of they might be doing, or how they might be treating the potential candidate.
I think asking people what they need is really important, and being very clear about how that information will and will not be used is really, really important as well. And there's some very clear technical guidance around that and legal frameworks around that. But I think the slightly oversimplistic way I like to think about it, when somebody visits my house, the first thing I'll typically say to them is, do you want something to drink? And being a stereotypical English person in this way, I was like, oh, do you want a cup of tea? I'll put the kettle on. Um, and that's a very rough parallel that I would draw, that if you're inviting somebody into your professional house, make them welcome. Ask what they will need. Ask how you can get the best version of that person from them in your interaction with them. Because I've recruited before, and I want everybody to bring the best version of themselves to an interview. I'm really interested in how I can create the conditions for people to give their best selves in interviews. So that might be something as simple as sharing the questions in advance to every candidate. So every candidate gets then the opportunity to reflect, because people have different learning styles and not everybody can come up with it with an instant example that's great. So really think about the measures that you can put in place to be able to make sure that in the recruitment process, you're demonstrating to candidates that you're open and that you're willing to listen, and that you can work with the candidate as you would if that person were to become an employee, to make sure that they can bring their talents into the workplace. And think about what the again, those quicker wins, those simple workarounds might be. You know, I've done quite a bit of work in Cambridge in the UK. For listeners who may not be aware, there's lots of history around Cambridge, and the university's been around for about 800 years. So in terms of building adaptations and things like that, it's not always the easiest place to have workarounds. But also what I've found is a lot of it is about culture and about mindset. Now, culture and mindset doesn't, build ramps and things like that. But having the openness and the willingness to think about and collaborate on solutions it is really, really important, and goes a long way to helping that inclusion happen.
I
Yeah.
loved your oversimplified version of imagining that these people coming into your home, and how would you treat them? And I think whether you are dealing with a potentially candidate with a certain disability, or just any candidate at all, I think we all get nervous. We have our own ways of dealing with stress, and it is a stressful situation when you're coming in. As an example, for an interview. I know you said it's oversimplified, but I think that's good because it paints the picture, and pictures are sometimes better to interpret than many other words. So thank you for the visual. I think it will help a lot of people.
And there seems to be a need for a systemic approach, right? At every single stage, not just in the working environment, but from the hiring and then all the way to actually working. And obviously, even if people are open to inclusion and they're curious, there is a need to do it professionally, like from, Purple Advantage, and there may be other companies who help at different parts of organization. But the main thing, what I was thinking is there is lots of work done, but what I'm hearing from you, Chris, is still we're not there. Right, 71% is a big number. In general, are you optimistic that the situation with diversity and inclusion and disability will change considerably?
Yes, and I think I have to be. And I think there's a lot of talk about resilience, and I think I've had to be personally quite resilient over the years, and will have to continue to be so. but I think that's where the growth happens. What's the alternative? I come on here and be despondent and pessimistic. Well, that's not going to help the change, is it? I'm not saying it is always easy, because sometimes it really isn't. And sometimes there are difficult things and difficult experiences. But again, from a very oversimplistic stance, if we start with what we can do, as opposed to what can't be done, then that's a better place to start. So I'll talk with clients and I'll be quite honest and straightforward with them and say, well, look, budget tends to be a sticking point for a lot of organizations, and the economies, the world over are in challenging positions in general at the moment. We're not awash with finance in general terms. And I said, well, look, give me an indication then of what your budget is, and we'll maximize the budget that you have available so that we can make an impact together and prioritize what can be done, and then have a tiered approach to that. If the budget's smaller, well, let's look at what we can do in terms of those quicker wins. And if the budget's bigger, then we can look in a more holistic sense and do more together over an extended period of time. But I think, what's the alternative than being optimistic? I support a terrible football team who, for lots of complicated reasons, are having such a tough season that I won't go into, because the former owner is quite litigious, so I'm not even going to mention the name of the football team. You'll have to follow me on LinkedIn or social media to find out who that is. But I've waited for about 30 years to see a good version of that football team that's doing well. And the joke often is you have to be an optimist to be a fan of that football team. So for lots of different reasons, I'm an optimist. And I think I don't want to get too deep and meaningful, but the way I look at things is, in general, I was born 6 weeks premature, had multiple instances of brain damage, which is where the CP, cerebral palsy, originates from in my case. And in a very real sense, but for the skill and tenacity of some brilliant surgeons and medical professionals, I literally shouldn't have been here. So I always think of every day as not a dress rehearsal and an opportunity to make an impact, because every day is a bonus. So why would you not get out there and try and see what difference you can make with it?
This is great. This is what you're telling us is not only you have optimism, but you also have very pragmatic approach. Yes, you do believe that things can change and you can contribute to that change. And together with Fran, you're actually taking concrete, specific steps to get there. And this is an inspiration for us all.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this. Yes, this is amazing.
It's a pleasure. And I encourage, we can't do these things on our own. So, and my own thought, we talk about leadership. I think everybody, leadership isn't a hierarchical thing in many ways. Anyone at any level of an organization, big, medium or small, can be a leader, can demonstrate leadership behaviors. I'd encourage everybody to be curious as a leader, be the most emotionally intelligent and compassionate version of a leader that you can be with regards to inclusion, but all manner of other things. And that will benefit the organization that you work in and make that organization a good place to be.
That's beautiful, Chris. Thank you for sharing this. I have a maybe final question for you. Anybody that's listening that may not be a decision maker for now, to pull you up and get Purple Advantage over and have a look what can be done. But they have this desire to still make a difference in the day to day, in the team that they are within. Is there anything that they could do on their own? Any small steps for improving a day to day?
Yeah, I think that there's always things that people can do in terms of, particularly in the multimedia world that we live in, right? There's loads of information out there, and my stance is knowledge is always power. So there are lots of, there's a great book on disability that I always recommend, that particularly for people in Europe, and I'm not sure on its worldwide availability, but it's called Disability, the Basics by Professor Tom Shakespeare. And that's a really, probably got it in my, where is it? I've not got it now, but I've usually got it to hand, because it's a really small, accessible volume that's very easy to read. There's lots of great stuff on YouTube. Purple Advantage can be found at purpleadvantage.com. We've got lots of blogs on all manner of things from disability advocacy awareness to why we're called purple, because purple is the colour of disability and why that is. So yeah, just be curious, and be open to acquiring different knowledge, to having a conversation with people, and call upon sources of support like us and other organisations that are out there to be able to start to have those conversations and the differences that they can make.
And
That's a
thank you
great
so much, Chris.
advice. Yes, Chris. I think we all can take those small steps, right? It doesn't take much to be curious, and this is our natural ability. And I think we can all take these steps and start changing things for better.
Yeah, and it's easy to think we all can be time poor. Okay, so I've got 10 minutes. Well, what one article can I read in 10 minutes? What podcast can I? This podcast is an hour. Okay, well, I've got half hour commute to and from work. Okay, so in a day, then we can listen to that podcast and see what things that sparks off. I've started as a part of the personal development I'm always doing. I've started to try and read for pleasure as opposed to burying my head in my library and business books. And I've started to try and read for half an hour each day just before bed. Try and break down the problem or whatever endeavor that you're doing into those small, manageable, attainable steps. I'll often talk to clients when I'm coaching and say, right, well, in a very approximate way, give me a rating out of 10 of where you're at. And okay, well, I'm at a 5. Okay, well, what would it take to get to a 6 then? Like, what can we do in that 30 minutes, in that hour, to be able to make that improvement and make that attainable and realizable?
That's a great advice, because it's not always the jumps, transformative actions that make a difference. It's the compounding interest of the little steps that we take. Like you said, maybe the 10 minutes they have free, and instead of scrolling through Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever your preference of social media is, I'm sure we all have one. Maybe refocus that to something else a little bit more productive. That's a great message.
Chris, I wanted to thank you for coming to our podcast, and we look forward also talking to Fran maybe next time, and having maybe both of you appear on one of our episodes and having other conversation and sharing more success stories. And we're looking forward to working with you, and we will leave the links to your profile, to your website of Purple Advantage as well, so maybe people and organizations will get in touch with you and collaborate.
Yeah, that'd be great. In whatever combination or configuration, we're happy to come back on in the future and continue the conversation. That'd be really great to do. And thanks again for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
Chris, it was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for your time, and we're looking forward to many more of these conversations. And in the meantime, we wish all the best luck with the new client that you cannot name yet as well.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. All the best.